Yeah, I just want to introduce the concept of the gold room, which Andrea really has been instrumental in sort of setting up and massively a driving force. I was saying just a minute ago, 90% of this is the energy generated by Andrea and what she's been doing, bringing people together. I think some of the sort of theory behind it, which is something I'm very interested in as a teacher, is to sort of take some of the ideas of Bakhtin, who is a Russian philosopher, and try and create dialogue between writers. What Bakhtin calls the dialogic imagination, which is a realization that you don't exist in a kind of void when you're a writer. Even when you're writing by yourself, you're writing in a conversation with either a text or with a person. You're writing to a specific audience. I think this is important to remember, even if it's an obvious point, because it can be forgotten, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Andrea and I are particularly interested in trying to create a productive dialogue for writers, and so that it's something that's going to be positive. And I think you can have the unproductive and the productive. The productive dialogue is the writers feeling free to embrace their mistakes and improve upon them. And the corollary of that is that the writer feels very defensive and won't make changes. You have the writer who feels secure that they know what they've got right, and then you've got the opposite of that, the writer who's forever changing and taking advice from the expert. You've got the writer entering this kind of idea of flow, which is very kind of trendy at the moment in sort of educational psychology, but definitely I think a really valid concept, where you're just constantly you're creating an environment where you can just concentrate fully on a piece of work without feeling distractions and having this, what Charlie was saying, this kind of critic in the head that's kind of criticising. Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow is particularly interesting on this, if anyone wants to follow up on that, book I'm reading at the moment. The writer who can never get into flow, for fear of not being good enough. That's the opposite. And then there's the writer that feels proud of their work even if no one else likes it. I think that's a kind of real sign of a kind of confident creative writer. And then the writer on the other side feeling everything they've done is rubbish, feeling ashamed of the work. Then you've got the writer who has realistic expectations and plans, and they plans their life strategically around these expectations. And then you've got this kind of concept of the great writer, which I think we're going to explore a bit later, where it's unrealistic, and they should they're constantly sort of aware of where they're standing in the kind of hierarchy of writers, of being published, winning prizes, and that kind of thing. What we wanted to do with the idea of the gold room is sort of picking up on an idea from Bourdieu of habitus. This is the idea that there's a kind of psychic space where writers can feel free to discuss things. And it is a kind of psychic space, but obviously Andrea and I have been talking about it needs to be a literal physical space, and I think on Thursday we're going to do this kind of this is not writerly behaviour, where kind of the idea that writers are a bit more like artists, and that's something that Andrea is going to talk about later. I suppose what really interests me is that in the context of a PhD in creative writing is that the institution of the university is creating a lasting creative writing disposition. It's carved out a kind of place for creative writing, which is really interesting. Being a school teacher for the last 20 years, creative writing really hasn't been on the curriculum very much, and it's now filtering in. There's an A-level in creative writing that's being introduced just this year, but it's taken all this time for the schools to sort of take on board, and that clearly, for me, is because of the pressure from the universities to do this. And I think that's an entirely positive thing. I suppose, though, one of the issues with the kind of creative writing kind of industry in universities is it does create the kind of myth of the individual genius, the kind of great writer that will be like this sort of umbrella for where, little writers can shade from the kind of rain of the nasty society that we live in. And I think that is problematic, and that's something we're going to talk about a bit later on. I'm going to finish there.